بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. نويت سعنا وتعليم وتذكر والتذكير ونفع تيفار إفادة استفادة وحتى أتمس بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم والدعاء إلى هدى والدلالة على خير التواب والسلام وضاعة وكربي وتوابه سبحانه وتعالى. اللهم علمنا مما ينفعنا وينفعنا مما تعلمنا وانزلنا من فضلك علما وتعليما انك على كل شيء قدير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So this session is going to be a little bit different from the previous sessions that we've done. This session we're going to be looking at the aspect of what we've been talking about in terms of having certainty in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we're going to be looking at it from a different lens. So previously we've been looking at it from the lens of rationality. So how do we come to have certainty about Allah from the intellect? Now we're going to look at it from the standpoint of how do we truly have a unwavering certainty. And the reason why I say that is because when it comes to certainty, there are different levels of certainty itself. And when you have certainty from the intellectual perspective, what happens is that that can be challenged by others. So for example, if someone comes with an argument that sounds intellectually stimulating and intellectually prevalent or strong, then it can place some doubt into your belief. And the thing about the aspect of the rational aspect of belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that for every argument that we can give for the belief in Allah, there's someone that will come with a counter argument. And then for every counter argument that we give to that, someone will come with a counter argument. And so depending on, where you stand in terms of these different arguments, it can end up being a situation where you never truly gain a complete certainty. And so this is why the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was confronted by the angel Jibril, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was asked about three dimensions of Islam, and we talked about these three dimensions before, where he talked about the dimension of Islam, then he talked about the dimension of Iman, and then he talked about the dimension of Ihsan. And we said that all three of these make up Islam proper. So you have Islam, Iman, and then you have Ihsan. The aspect of Islam is that it doesn't necessarily require that a person actually believe in Allah. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, as we mentioned before, that He said to some of the Meccans after the Fath of Mecca, do not say you believe, rather say you've submitted. Because the aspect of Islam can just be that I just go with the flow of the Muslims, essentially. That, in the case of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when that verse was revealed, it was more or less talking about the people of Mecca who more or less, it was a thing of if we can't beat them, then join them type of situation. Whereas in our cases, and even in the early generations, sometimes it's a situation where, well, mom and dad said we was Muslim, so I'm just going with the flow. They said that we fast during this time, they say that we're supposed to pray at this time, so on and so forth. So this is why this is the largest sphere, so to speak. Why? Because anyone that's going to claim any aspect of Islam, and again, I'm talking about, when I say Islam now, I'm talking about the overarching aspect of what I like to say Islam proper, capital I, so to speak. Meaning that the whole deen of Islam is representative with these three aspects. So anyone that's going to be consider themselves to be Muslim in any type of fashion, they're first going to come through this doorway, the aspect of Islam. However, the aspect of Islam, it deals primarily with what? Fiqh. Now, fiqh, this is the aspect of essentially law. So it's talking about do's and don'ts, validity and invalidity, so on and so forth. And for many people, this is where their Islam is. They look at Islam as being nothing but a bunch of rules, whether they're Muslim or not. This is why, for example, you hear people, I just had someone tell me yesterday that, what if someone's considering being Muslim, but they're not sure if they're ready to, do all the things that's necessary to be a Muslim. Like they know they're still going to do things that is impermissible in Islam and so on and so forth. So the thing is that person's primary focus in terms of Islam has to do with the aspect of fiqh, do's and don'ts, validity, invalidity, so on and so forth. However, if you limit yourself to just fiqh, or as we've been talking about before, if you limit yourself to just iman, in terms of just, going over rationally, why do we believe in God and so on and so forth, you're going to be limited and you're going to be on shaky ground. Because with fiqh, if a person only focuses on fiqh, generally speaking, what will happen is that they'll get burnt out. Why? Because they have no impetus, they have nothing, motivating them to, keep it up. It just becomes a bunch of rules. And the problem with that is they're not looking at the level of ihsan, which we're going to talk about today. Ihsan is where we say that you get that actual certainty. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when he was actually asked about ihsan, he was asked about excellence or spiritual excellence, he responded by saying, it is to worship Allah as though you see Him, and if you see Him not, then know that verily He sees you. So the aspect, first and foremost, is to worship Allah as though you see Him. The scholars, they refer to this aspect as mushahada. Mushahada comes from the same word as, shahada. For example, when you say ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, it means to witness. So this aspect of being in a state of mushahada is that you're witnessing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're experiencing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the whole concept of worshiping Allah as though you see Him. Meaning that with the eyes, physically, we cannot see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But with the heart, we can experience Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, there's a problem. What is the problem? The problem is us. We're the problem. Why are we the problem? We can go to the Quran for that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, in 3 separate chapters, He mentions the different varieties of the soul. The first one that He mentions in Surah Yusuf, the chapter of Yusuf. After Yusuf is removed from the prison, and Yusuf is, essentially trying to clear his name, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in that chapter, He mentions the aspect of a first type of soul. And the soul that He mentions is the soul that commands the evil. In Arabic, he says, "An-nafsu ammara bisu." So the evil commanding soul, the soul that commands the evil. This is the first soul that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions. Now the thing is that generally speaking, we all more or less have to deal with this first soul. Why? Because our egos, our nafs, our souls, and when we're talking about the soul here, we're not talking about the aspect of the ruh in terms of the true spiritual aspect of the human being. We're more or less talking about the egotistic aspect of the human being. Our basic soul commands the evil. How do we know this additionally from the Quran? And this is the beauty of the Quran, is that you can actually use the Quran to explain itself. One of the aspects of tafsir, explanation of the Quran, is when you use verses of the Quran to explain the other verses of the Quran. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions elsewhere in the Quran, He says, after swearing by the teen and the zaytun, by the fig and the olive, and He swears by the Mount Sinai, وَطُورِ سِينِينَ وَهَذَا بَلَدٍ أَمِينَ, and upon the blessed land or the sacred land, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, that verily we have created the human being in the most excellent of molds. أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ, coming from that same word ihsan, أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. Now, one of the significant things about the aspect of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying that He's created the human being in the best of molds, أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ, is that the human being in and of itself actually has the capability to even be better than the angels. That's how excellent Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created the human being. Is that we have the capability to be better than the angels themselves. The only ones that we cannot be better than as individuals are the prophets. The prophets are the best of human beings. However, we have the capability to be the best of Allah's creation outside of the prophets, including the angels. So this is that aspect of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying that He's created us in the best of molds, ahsani taqweem. The only thing is that the story doesn't stop there. Because what's the next verse? ثُمَّ ذَرْدَتْنَهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says after that, then we've made them of the lowest of the low. If you go to another verse of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains further kind of what this means when He says the lowest of the low. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says elsewhere in the Quran, He says, كَالْأَنَامِ بَلْ أَدَلْ, talking about the human being. He says about the human being that they're like cattle. Actually, they're even more astray. بَلْ أَدَلْ, meaning that we're more astray than cattle if we go to the base nature that we have. That is the aspect of the human being. Is that we have the potential to be the greatest of Allah's creation. However, oftentimes we will make ourselves even lower than the animals. Because the aspect of the animals is that the animals, they do what they're naturally charged to do. Like, the question that I usually ask is like, for example, have you ever seen an obese wild animal? Like you turn off National Geographic, or you go and, you walk into the forest in the woods, or you go to a safari or something like that. Have you ever seen an obese wild animal? Have you even seen an overweight wild animal? The only time that you see overweight animals or obese animals is when you put a human being in charge of that animal's care. You put a human being in charge of that animal's care, all of a sudden you get obesity, overweight, and so on and so forth. You let that animal go about his business on his own, perfectly fine. I mean, of course, yeah, they'll have some, different issues that, anyone will have, but generally speaking, they're going to flourish, perfectly fine. It's only when we come into the picture that it becomes a problem. Why is that? Asfala safilin. We've made you of the lowest of the low. Why? Because we have a nafs, we have a soul, we have an ego that commands to evil. Those are those things that we incline towards, that are displeasing and disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yep.
If we have a soul, so you compare us to the ability to be able to surpass the angels, and I guess practice every man. If the angels are already created to do exactly as Allah commands, and we have a soul that commands us to evil,
how can we get better than the angels?
Yes.
Yeah. So you actually answer the question in your question. The reason why we are able to get to a station that's even higher than the angels is the very fact that we have the capability not to. So the angels, as you mentioned, they don't have a choice. They only obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They obey, and that's it. We have a choice. So if we choose to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we have the choice to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that gives us a rank above the angels. As the angels have no choice. The majority opinion of the ulama, of the scholars, they mention about the angels that they have no aspect of free will. They only do what they are commanded to do. So they have no ability to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's a slight difference between the scholars. Like some will say they have no ability whatsoever, some will say that they just don't. But either case, they never disobey Allah. However, the human being, we have the capability to do so. So if we use that capability to do so, not to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it allows us to be in a situation where we can go to a higher station than the angels. The aspect of it is that when you have a choice and you choose to do the right thing, is different than if you don't have a choice at all and you just force in some aspect to do the right thing. And so this is part of the aspect of the human being. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that we have a soul that commands to evil. Now, this is why, for example, you have to include this aspect of Islam, which we said that for the most part is the aspect of fiqh, of jurisprudence. And that's just how we understand it today. My intention, inshallah, as we, inshallah, will have further classes, is to start going to the aspects of fiqh and things of that nature. However, right now, at a higher end level in our contemporary times, fiqh is usually referred to as jurisprudence. It's definitely more to that. Like we can go to the aspect of lugatan, shar, and so on and so forth. That's a whole nother conversation. However, fiqh in the aspect of jurisprudence is important. Why? Because we have to understand what it is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has deemed to be evil or not. Why do I say that? Because what we may or may not deem to be evil may not be the same as what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deems to be or not to be evil. Example. How many people in general like sexual intercourse? Not necessarily everybody. There are some people who are, but again, that'll be the minority. But the thing is that many people enjoy that. Now, the thing is that unless it's in a marital situation, is that something evil or not? Now, if you ask a person in general, some will give you an argument to say that it's not evil. If it's two consenting adults, so on and so forth, then it's not evil. However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, if it's not in a marital situation with certain other circumstances and conditions, then it is evil. So we have to understand fiqh in order to be able to understand what is evil. Which leads us to the second type of soul that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions. And this one is mentioned in Surah Al-Qiyamah. And this is the self-reproaching soul. In Arabic, it's mentioned as an-nafs al-lawama. An-nafs al-lawama, this is the soul where it starts to understand what it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited, and is struggling with itself to fall in line. So that's the aspect of an-nafs al-lawama, is that it's a soul where it starts to recognize the aspect of it commanding to evil. And I told my wife yesterday, I said that I'm probably going to have some people be upset with me today. And I intentionally plan to do that. So if people get upset with me, it's okay. You can join the list. But I'm going to give you an example. So for example, an-nafs al-amara bisu. This is the soul that commands to evil. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions in the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah, and this is part of the last two ayahs in Surah Al-Baqarah. And these are ayahs that are recommended to recite every night before you go to sleep. So in that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions, and this is mentioned elsewhere, but in Surah Al-Baqarah, this is a perfect example, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the concept of the believer, the mu'min, the one that truly believes, that the mu'min, he says what? Sami'na wa ata'na. That we hear and then we obey. That's the aspect of the believer. We hear and we obey. Now, for example, the aspect of the self-reproaching soul is that, for example, we have from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and the reason why I'm going to be mentioning this is because the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he is our guideline to understand what is fiqh in the first place. What is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's commands, what is his prohibitions, so on and so forth. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he has multiple different ahadith, multiple different statements that indicate the sometimes impermissibility of music, or sometimes the aspect of limitations in music. So the command is that we're not, as Muslims, and ultimately as believers, we're not allowed to listen to certain aspects of music. Now the thing is that the question becomes, how many Muslims listen to music? So now it becomes a situation of an-nafs ammara bisu, the nafs that commands the evil, but trying to get to this point of an-nafs lawama, the self-reproaching soul. This aspect of fighting against our desires in order to follow the command of Allah. Because put it like this, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger of Allah sallallahu Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says in the Quran, Ati Allah wa ati Rasul. Obey the messenger, obey me, obey Allah, and obey the messenger. Right? The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he mentions in a sound narration, La yuminu ahadakum. None of you will truly believe. Hatta hawahu yattabi'u bima jittu bi. That none of you will truly believe until his desires are in alignment with what I have brought. Meaning that what we incline towards are supposed to be in alignment with what the Prophet ﷺ brought. Now, if I mention this aspect of music, now one thing I have to mention is that you can't categorically say that the whole corpus of what would be considered music is haram. That's definitely not the case. Why? Because we do have sound narrations of, for example, the Prophet ﷺ himself joining with the Sahaba in singing. Or, for example, the aspect of the Prophet ﷺ allowing for the young girl to play the duff and sing on the Eid and so on and so forth. So it's not the whole corpus. However, there are certain aspects that we definitely know for certain are not permissible. So, for example, one of the aspects that we are not allowed to do in terms of being Muslim is that, for example, those things that are haram for us and permissible for us, it's haram for us to do them, but it's also haram and permissible for us to take enjoyment in them. So, for example, if I listen to music, what are some of the popular songs that we have? Like I was thinking about this, previously. Like, the songs of today, we probably don't even have to mention them. Some of them you can't even mention the title of the song. Is bad enough. But let's go back, back to like, the 70s and so on and so forth. Because what I found sometimes is that, some of my elders and so on and so forth, they like to mention like, back in our days, we didn't have all these songs like you guys got today where all they're cursing and stuff like that. But let's dissect some of this. Let's go back. You go back. I don't even remember who the man was. But I remember as I got older and I actually started to kind of like focus in on like what people were actually saying, that I remember when I was younger, there was a song that was called Me and Mrs. Jones. Now, one of the reasons why it stuck out to me is because my family name is Jones. So like that kind of like stuck out to me because I was a really young kid. Because of course the song came out before I was even born. And this is the song that, the elders, would, like and so on and so forth. But actually think about what is actually going on in that song. Essentially, what is it going on? Adultery.
Yeah, they're cheating.
Adultery. So you're enjoying a song that's talking about adultery. Not only that, but he's trying to justify why it's right. Okay, that's just one example. Okay, fine. Let's go to, another aspect, the whispers. There was one where they I told you, some people not gonna like me. There's one thing in the whispers. I remember they had, living together in sin. That was one of their, big songs, living together in sin. That was the whole concept of the song. What is it about? Fornication. But the thing is that if we're at a state where we're still here, that we haven't even come to the point of saying, like, I need to not be here. The thing is that what did the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, inform us about the aspect of sin? Is that he told us that the aspect of sin is that it's like putting a black stain on your heart. And the more that stain goes onto your heart, the darker your heart becomes, the more easy it becomes to commit sin, to the point that you may lose all iman from your heart. And that's the worst thing that can happen to an individual. This is why we try to come to this aspect of ihsan. It's not just an aspect of saying I believe, or it's not just an aspect of saying that, well, I do some of the commands. The whole aspect of ihsan is that I'm trying to go through these processes. And I'm going to skip to the third one, just so I can continue to talk about, all this aspect. The third type of soul that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, He mentions the soul of Fajr. So this is a nafs amar bisu, this is nafs lawama. The next soul that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions is a nafs mutma'inna, the tranquil soul.
Surah Al-Fajr, you said.
Surah Al-Fajr. At the end of Surah Al-Fajr. The tranquil soul. And what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say about the tranquil soul, particularly in this particular surah? He says about the tranquil soul, a nafs mutma'inna. He says, Ya ayyuha nafs mutma'inna, irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyah. He says, O tranquil soul, return to your Lord, pleased and well pleased. Now the thing is that if you take it from an outward perspective, in terms of, like, how some of the Mufassirin may say about, the scholars of Tafsir may say in terms of, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying, return to your Lord. You can take it from, like, the more literal perspective, where it's that, when we die, the whole basis is, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Is that, verily we belong to Allah, and to Allah we are returning. The aspect of me, returning to Allah. And so, from the outward perspective, saying, like, when, inshallah, God willing, that when it's time for our souls to return back to Allah, we will be in a state of being mutma'inna. We have a tranquil soul. And that'll be an indication that we're ready to return to Allah. But some of the scholars of the inner sciences, of the aspect of spirituality, this aspect of ihsan, will also say that it's not just the aspect of when you actually physically die, but that it can be a situation that you experience that even before you die. The aspect of the tranquil soul is that I reach a point where I return to my Lord even before I die. The aspect is I die before I die. And what it means by I die before I die is that I slay my soul, this soul, the nafs that commands to evil. As one of my teachers would ask, what does it take to reach Allah? He said, the answer to the question is another question. What do you have? Because it's going to take everything of you. Meaning that I give myself up so that I can be with my Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if I come to that point, I can have that tranquil soul. But until I come to this point where I go from having a soul that commands to evil to a soul that recognizes the evil that I'm being commanded to now I'm trying to better myself, I'm doing a self-reproaching of myself, then I can come to this aspect of having a tranquil soul. And then once I have this tranquil soul, now I can go to this aspect of ihsan, where I can, inshallah, hopefully reach this aspect of mushahada, where I experience Allah. Because up until that point, I have all these veils. All these things are going to be blocking me from my connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why we need all of these things. Because if a person only focuses on Islam, it's just going to be a bunch of rules. And you're going to, some of them are going to be fine for you, others are going to not be. Some of them are going to be easy, some of them are going to be not. So what's going to happen is that, generally speaking, you're going to do like most of us do. We pick and choose. And then we, try to, give a reason why, oh, well, this is why this is, and this is why that is, and so this is why I don't have to do it, or it doesn't apply to me, and so on and so forth. That's because we're operating the aspect of Islam. So it's nothing but rules. And, we have the American concept that, rules are meant to be broken. And it's not, necessarily a big deal. But this is why you also need the aspect of Iman. Because now if I have Iman, where I have a true understanding of why it is that I'm supposed to do these things. Why do I worship God? Why do I believe in his messenger? Why do I believe in the hellfire? Why do I believe in paradise? That takes on a different perspective. Now it's a situation like, all right, this is real. So now I may do the aspect of Islam, but still kind of feel forced in it, just because I just don't want to go to hell. But I have more of an emphasis here. So you're getting better, so to speak. But the thing is that, wouldn't you rather be in a situation where you have absolute joy in what it is that you're doing? Here's ihsan. As one of the scholars was mentioned in Tanim in the city of Yemen where I was studying, they mentioned about one of the earlier scholars. He said that for 20 years, I tasted the bitterness of getting up in the middle of the night to pray the tahajjud prayer, the night prayer. And then he said for 20 years after that, I tasted the sweetness. Meaning he had to struggle against himself for 20 years, forcing himself to get up, forcing himself to go through it. But eventually with that struggle, he reached his level of ihsan. Then it was 20 years, it was just sweet to him. There was nothing he'd rather do. His heart became, purified. But again, this is why all these things have to work in cohesion together. You can't take out one and expect to have a cohesive Muslim. It doesn't work that way. And this is why for some of us, we're struggling with our aspects of Islam. Because there are some people who will just try to focus on ihsan. That's problematic. Why? Because they'll go all over the place. The people that just, everything is spiritual and so on and so forth. So they have no concept of law. They have no concept of belief. And so they can believe whatever and they can do whatever, essentially. If it feels good, then, I'm going to do it. This is why you have to have all three working in cohesion. And when you get to this aspect of ihsan, that's the aspect of experience. And this is why the scholars, they mention about the aspect of ihsan. If you reach this level of mushahada, that's actually just the beginning. It's not the end, but it's actually the beginning. Like you traveling to Allah, finally reaching to Allah, now you've actually begun the path. But you have to go through all of these processes. So for example, when we talk about Islam, I'm going to erase this. When we talk about Islam, first and foremost, in order to have more of an aspect of ihsan, more of an aspect of spiritual excellence in your Islam proper, as we've been calling it, is that when you're learning Islam in terms of fiqh, there are certain things that you have to take in consideration. Is that fiqh, like we mentioned, is the aspect of learning the do's and the don'ts, the validity, the invalidity, so on and so forth. So, first and foremost, you have to learn two things. The first of those two things is obligations. What have I actually been obligated to do? I have to know what they are. The second thing is prohibitions. What have I been commanded not to do? I have to know what they are. And I have to work on these two until I implement them, such that in terms of obligations, it's a rare occasion if I ever miss one. And if I do miss one, I'm quick to make it up. And when it comes to prohibitions, I have to learn what they are, and I have to do everything that I can to avoid them. And actually, avoiding the prohibitions is actually more important than doing the obligations. Everybody got that? Avoiding the prohibitions is more important than even doing the obligations. Now, I'm not saying that both of these are not important. This is why I put both of them here. These both are important. But this is even more important, avoiding the prohibitions. Because even the Messenger of Allah, he mentioned to a Sahaba, and ultimately to the rest of us, even to this day, that do as much of my sunnah as you can. And as for those things that I prohibit you from, avoid them completely. Where the Prophet said to me, saying that those things that I've commanded you to do, essentially, and recommended you to do as much of them as you can. But prohibitions, avoid them altogether. As one of the Sahaba had asked the Messenger of Allah, he said about him asking messengers, he said that, the other Sahaba, they used to ask the Prophet about good, I used to ask him about evil in order that I may avoid it. Because the aspect of, for example, if I'm doing my obligations but I'm still committing prohibitions, that's like taking one step forward, two steps back. Why? Because the aspect of prohibitions is that it's blackening your heart. And this is why throughout this whole process of doing the obligations and avoiding the prohibitions, this is going to be your bread and butter. Tawbah is going to be your bread and butter. The scholars, they mention about the aspect of Tawbah, that it's the beginning of the path, the middle of the path, the end of the path. You'll never finish it. The Prophet Muhammad, they say about him that he used to seek forgiveness of his Lord more than 70 times a day. And he's the one where Allah said that he's forgiven him. And we also know about him that he's mahsoom. He doesn't commit sin. But he still sought the forgiveness of his Lord 70 to 100 times a day. And why is the aspect of Tawbah so important? Because if you look at even the root word for the word Tawbah, Taba Yatubu, it means what? To turn back. Why? Because if I engage in a prohibition, or if I neglect an obligation, what does that mean? I've gone away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so what do I have to do? I have to turn back to Him. I can't reach the level of ihsan if I haven't mastered these. And like I said, it's not an aspect of just knowing what they are, but it's an aspect of implementing them. And the thing is that no one expects anyone to be perfect when it comes to striving for this. Meaning that we'll make mistakes. However, that's why Tawbah is so important. However, what you want to have be your situation is that your Tawbah is truly sincere. How can you get an indication that your Tawbah is truly sincere? That the aspect of missing one of these or engaging one of these happens very rarely. It's a rare occurrence. It doesn't happen often. It's a shock, so to speak, when it does happen. And not only that, but as we talked about in the hadith that we mentioned from the Prophet ﷺ, that you don't even desire to do it anymore. You actually have a dislike for it. Similar, for example, like the young man that came to the Prophet ﷺ and asked him to make fornication permissible for him. At the end of the narration, the young man said that after I left the Prophet ﷺ, there was nothing that became more displeasing to me than fornication. That's what we want to come to. When we love what Allah loves and we hate what Allah hates. After we get to this point, it wasn't over with just these two. After we get to this point, What do? We look at those things that are what? In Arabic we say makruh. In English we say disliked. Those things that are makruh or disliked, now they have to go. Because what's the nature of something being disliked? It means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will reward you for leaving them off. But He won't necessarily punish you for doing them. And even the reason of me saying it that way is because some of the things that are considered to be makruh, they're differed upon according to some of the scholars. Like for example, some scholars consider certain things to be disliked, other scholars consider them to be haram. So for example, a man growing his beard. According to some scholars, they consider from the statements of the Prophet ﷺ that for a man to not grow his beard is actually haram. While other scholars will say that a man not growing his beard is disliked. So in us trying to come to the level of ihsan, of being in a state where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our main focus, that we're trying to get to a point where we worship Him as though we see Him, we're going to treat this almost more or less like it's this. That I don't want to do anything that's going to make my beloved unhappy with me. Because that's the whole aspect of trying to get to. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala becomes who is most beloved to you. It's just like, for example, if you're courting someone, you're trying to marry someone or something like that, what do? You put your best foot forward. And what happens? You try to do all the things that they would like, and you try to avoid all the things that they would dislike, even the minor things that, they wouldn't necessarily, it wouldn't cause a riffle in your relationship, but you just know that it's not something that they would like. And so you go that extra mile just not to do it. So if that's from the standpoint of human beings, what about the one that gave us everything that we love in the first place? The one that we're returning to. The one that is going to give us everlasting bliss, or possibly the opposite of that. And so the next aspect is avoiding those things that He dislikes. Followed up by those things that are supererogatory. What is this? These are those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likes, but He's not necessarily made them obligations. So now we start engaging in these. That's like the story that I mentioned to you of the alim, or the scholar, who prayed tahajjud, the nighttime prayer, for 20 years. And it was a difficulty for him. But him struggling with himself to get through that, after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opened it up for him so that he's tasted the sweetness of it for the next 20 years. Engaging in the supererogatory. Because what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say about that? He says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Hadith Qudsi, He mentions that my servant does nothing more beloved to me than that which I've made obligatory upon him. And when you actually mention this, you can really put these two together in an aspect. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made an obligation that we do what He's commanded, and also that we avoid what He's prohibited. So ultimately it goes from the aspect of obligation. We're just separating between the two in this aspect. But then He says what? And my servant continues to draw near to me until I love him with the supererogatory works. I mean, what does it mean for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to love you? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions part of that. I become the hearing by what you hear, the eyes by what you see, the hand by what you grasp, the feet by what you walk. If you were asked of me, I will surely give to you. But it comes to these aspects. Engaging in the supererogatory. And then, if you want to really, if you're really serious about getting to the aspect of mushahida, avoiding this. Avoiding those things that are doubtful. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said, "Da' ma yaridek ila ma la yaribek." Leave that which causes you doubt for that which does not cause you doubt. He also says that إن حلالين وإن حلالين وبينهما أمور متشابهات لا يأمنهن كثير من الناس. That the halal is clear and the haram is clear, and between them are doubtful matters, and most people do not know about them. And he mentioned about them that whoever avoids those doubtful matters, he's protected his honor and his deen. So I mean, for most of us, just this alone in our times is enough of a project. Then trying to get to here, then trying to get to here, then trying to get to here. But the aspect of it is that, you know, if we're really serious about this aspect, that's what we're trying to come to. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because this all goes into the aspect of ihsan. In the beginning, yes, it may be difficult. But this is, you know, you have to look at what is it that you're trying to gain? What is it that you're trying to achieve? Because in the process of us going through this, of trying to engage in this, and, you know, making sure that we have an aspect of understanding of why we're doing this, trying to reach a point where we'll come to love this, that it becomes, you know, something that we are fully engaged in. This is the second part of that statement of the Prophet ﷺ when he defined ihsan, that you worship Allah so you see him. The second part was what? If you see him not, then know that verily he sees you. That is referred to as muraqabah. And that's what all this is in the situation where it's a difficulty. Meaning that you're still, you know, you may be consistently falling into sin. Or you may be consistently missing obligations. But as long as you're constantly trying to improve on the situation, that's the aspect of muraqabah. I'm watching over myself. I'm paying attention now. You really want to get serious about it? Carry with yourself a piece of paper and a pen everywhere you go. Anytime that you do anything that is haram or disliked, write it down. And then make tawbah from it. You really want to get serious about it? Write it down, and then also mention the situation that happened that put you in that situation. So for example, if you start to see, oh, I'm backbiting. I just backbit somebody. Start writing down the situation. I was talking to so-and-so. So for example, if after 3-4 months, you've seen that you had to write down that you were backbiting multiple times, but every time that you did it, it was with so-and-so, that's an indication. Okay, I need to stop talking to so-and-so. So-and-so is going to cause me severe harm. But this is that aspect of watching over the self, muraqabah.
That's watching over the self.
Watching over yourself. To worship Allah, knowing that He sees you. And the thing is that why are we mentioning this in the aspect of, again, the class on, you know, gaining certainty amongst confusion, is that if you start to travel this path of trying to go to the level of ihsan, that is going to give you that unshakable certainty. Why? Because, like we mentioned before with that example, if I experience something, it doesn't matter how many empirical or rational proofs someone gives me, I've experienced it. If I experience Allah, I don't care how many academics try to come with some new proof of why they say God doesn't exist. I've experienced God. This is that true aspect of ihsan. However, you can't get to that point without going through all of this process. The aspect of, I'm going to leave what Allah SWT has commanded me to leave, whether I like it or not. Even if I incline towards it, I'm going to let it go. Allah says He doesn't like it. Submitna wa ta'na. Allah SWT has commanded me to do it, even if it's a difficulty for me. Submitna wa ta'na. You know, for many of us, we don't necessarily like to have to get up in the middle of the night, or to get up for, you know, before the sun rises. But submitna wa ta'na. You know, for many of us, you know, we may incline towards, you know, certain aspects of music or something like that. But Allah's commanded me not to listen to it. Submitna wa ta'na. For some of us, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, He's commanded, you know, that we don't engage in inappropriate relationships with the opposite sex. So, submitting Allah Ta'ala. So on and so forth. The whole aspect of it is that, yes, some of this is going to be difficult. And the reason why it's going to be difficult is because, again, it's coming at your very self. That's why I said in the beginning, what is the biggest problem with reaching Allah? Us. Us. We are the biggest problem. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does the Prophet say? That if you come a handspan to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will come to your arm's length. If you come walking, He'll come running. It's just that we don't want to even come to that handspan. It's like, you mean I gotta... this is what we talked about in the beginning, is that for many of us, we want Allah to meet us on our terms. Ya Allah, I want to worship you, and I want to have a relationship with you, but we need to do it on my terms. So I know what you said, but we need to make some adjustments to this contract. So the whole music thing, that's something else. The whole marriage thing, that I can only have a relationship with marriage, like we need to adjust that one too. And this whole getting up and waking up before sunrise, I like to sleep in. It doesn't work that way. You want Him, you have to come to Him on His terms. And again, it's not necessarily going to be easy. But the thing is that the reward and the benefit that you get from it can't be explained. And I'll end with this in particular, because this is like it's a motivational factor for some of us. There was once a scholar that I was told about. I believe I was probably told about this while I was in Yemen, or I might have been somewhere else. But there was a scholar who, in the month of Ramadan, and the month of Ramadan is fastly approaching. We got about 2 months left, and then Ramadan will be here. But in the month of Ramadan, it was mentioned about a particular scholar. He used to say that I don't like to recite the Quran during the day in Ramadan. And the question kind of becomes like, that sounds a little bit weird. Why? Because Ramadan is a month of the Quran. For example, the great Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah ta'ala, it's mentioned about him is that he actually used to read the entire Quran twice a day in Ramadan. So at the end of Ramadan, he have to recite the Quran either 58 or 60 times. And so it's just like, why would a person that's considered to be a scholar say that I dislike to recite the Quran during the day in Ramadan? And he explained to the people, he said that the reason why I dislike to recite the Quran during the day in Ramadan is because when I recite the Quran, I get the taste of honey in my mouth. It's like, it's like the sweetness of eating honey in my mouth. And he said that when I recite the Quran during the day, it feels like I'm breaking my fast. Now, how many of us have had that experience with the Quran? But how much did he work on himself to come to that point? And this is, that aspect. The great Sahaba, Uthman ibn Affan, they used to say about him that he used to recite the entire Quran in one night in his tahajjud prayer. Like, sometimes we kind of, think, we kind of get, spooked out when we hear about the Prophet ﷺ reciting Surah Al-Baqarah, Al-Imran, Nisa in one rak'ah in his prayer at night. And the one Sahaba said, I almost committed a sin because I could barely keep up. But Uthman ibn Affan, he's reciting the entire Quran. Just imagine the relationship he had with the Book of Allah, that he would do that. Like, the way that I usually compare it to is like, think of something that you can do all the time. Like, you think about a TV show that you like, and they have a marathon on it. How many hours of television could you watch and just sit there fully engaged? Like, 3 hours, 4 hours to go past, and you don't even notice. You're just fully, engaged. You're fully, entertained. You're like, everything about, like, you don't even notice anything else going on around you. Or think about the time you had a good book, good entertaining book. You're reading chapter after chapter after chapter, like 3 hours went by. It's like, what happened to the time? But you were so engrossed in that book. This is how some people are engrossed with Allah. Their relationship with Allah is such that they can spend hours in those things that are considered to be worship of Allah. And it's the most beautiful experience to them. As many of them describe it, it's like they can't even describe it, such that none of the pleasures of this world can compare to what I experience when I'm worshiping Allah. That's how they usually explain it. But again, to get there, they struggle with themselves. They recognize that nafs that commands to evil. They graduated to the self-reproaching nafs, looking over themselves. And then they reach that level of that tranquil soul, that mutma'inna. And once you reach that level of mutma'inna, you don't have to worry about the aspect of rational proofs and so on and so forth about the existence of Allah. You've experienced Him. So inshallah, may Allah SWT make us of those who experience Allah SWT. May Allah SWT make us of those who have absolute yaqeen in all levels. And may Allah SWT forgive us for our shortcomings and give us the desire and the himma and the strength and the capability to obey His commands and avoid His prohibitions. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin nabiyyin ummi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alam wa huwa hasbuna wa ni'mal wakeel. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.